Part 95. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 955. With a lot of fatigue, he drove back to his home community, parked the car in the underground parking garage, and walked into the elevator. Since the last incident about his girlfriend, Chu Zhao also changed houses. There was a mirror in the elevator, and Chu Zhao could clearly see the tiredness on his face. It was not because the police station was so busy, but because the two recent real-life tasks were indeed a bit heavy for his load. One of them, if sooner hadn't arrived in time to help, he would have been at risk of an accident. Furthermore, I don't know why I've been feeling restless lately, and Chu Zhao couldn't tell any causal reasons. However, he checked in the audience forum and found that everyone seems to have a lot on their plate recently. At least, there are more real tasks than usual. A lot came out. The audience's enthusiasm for real-life tasks is also to flatter the broadcaster, because after helping the broadcaster complete the real-life tasks, they can get some preferential treatment in the next story world. In the final analysis, it is to increase their probability of survival. After pressing 18, Chu Zhao slowly took a few steps back and leaned his back against the side of the elevator. He felt that he might not be particularly suitable to be an audience, or in other words, after spending the initial fear and excitement after that, my mental state became worse and worse, as if I was driving while fatigued. I wanted to step on the accelerator as hard as I could. Whether I hit someone or not, or whether something happened to me was purely up to God. Ding! The elevator reached the floor, and the elevator door opened slowly. Chu Zhao took his hat and walked out. But as soon as he stepped outside, a sudden chill ran up his spine. After experiencing the story world many times, Chu Zhao's instincts have been developed. In addition, his profession is a policeman, so he will be more sensitive to some things. Turn left in front of your home and you will arrive, but Chu Zhao did not stretch out his feet to move forward at this time. The lights were still on, and you could even hear the noisy voices of the children in the house. Everything was really normal and normal. It was normal, but Chu Zhao had a feeling of impending disaster. The strong sense of crisis was like a hand strangling his throat, making him almost breathless. He subconsciously reached out and pressed the elevator button. Because it was late at night, no one else was using the elevator at this time. The elevator was still on this floor after closing the door just now, so the elevator door opened directly. Chu Zhao stepped back and went in. He believed in his intuition and did not think that he was a warrior. However, when Chu Zhao stepped back into the elevator, he found that there was an extra person in the elevator. It's a woman. The woman is wearing a pink coat, light blue jeans, and a ponytail, giving her a youthful and charming aura. Team Chu. The woman looked at Chu Zhao lovingly. Chu Zhao's hand shook violently. This woman was his ex-girlfriend, and she was almost married, but she died and was killed by Subai. Because of this, I had a long-term conflict with Subai. In fact, she was killed by Subai. Shang Chu Zhao also understood a long time ago that what Subai did was right. He helped him. Moreover, the reason why the relationship between the two became more and more estranged was just the trigger but not the real reason. Seeing his ex-girlfriend again, he was still very charming, but Chu Zhao didn't lose control of his emotions at all, nor did he rush to shout his girlfriend's name and express his heart like a scene in those mentally retarded TV dramas. A talisman appeared directly in his right hand. The paper was placed on the woman's brow without hesitation. She is already dead. No. She was actually already dead. When he fell in love with her, she was no longer a real person. The talisman began to burn, and the woman began to scream. Her face was full of grievances and tears, as if she couldn't believe that her fiancé would treat her like this. She was in pain, she felt uncomfortable, she was innocent, but at the same time, her body starting to melt. The elevator door began to close at this time, and Chu Zhao reached out to block the elevator door. In a critical moment, this pattern of closing all sides and opening only one side is actually the best way to give people a sense of security, because your subconscious will feel that you are surrounded by to be safe. You only need to face threats that may appear in one direction, but if you are completely closed, your sense of security will disappear instantly, as if you have no room for escape. But there was only a click sound, and the closing elevator door seemed to turn into two guillotines at this time. Chu Zhao only felt his right arm tremble, and then found that his entire right hand was broken from the wrist. The elevator door was still closed, and at the same time, the elevator started to start again. Chu Zhao looked at his severed right palm, and the tension and fear in his heart increased rapidly, but he had not completely lost his sense of control. After all, for the audience, the real world is affected by no matter how serious the injury is, you will recover when you enter the next story world. The most important thing is to save your life. What exactly is going on? Who is going to take action against him? The ex-girlfriend had turned into a puddle of pus under the influence of the talisman, and the already sealed elevator space immediately became foul-smelling. Buzz. The descending elevator suddenly stopped again at this moment, and then, from the gaps in the elevator, pieces of white paper seemed to be stuffed in. These white papers were not ordinary A4 papers, they had been artificially cut one by one. Humanoid figures, like pieces of paper, entered the elevator through the gap and began to attack Chu Zhao directly. In fact, paper is very sharp. Every year, there are many unlucky students in school who rub paper against their lips and get a big cut. At this time, these paper figures are like a handful of paper. He stabbed Chu Zhao with the sharp dagger. Chu Zhao's right hand has been broken off, and he doesn't know which layer the broken hand was left on. At this moment, his eyes showed a touch of dark red, and then wisps of dark red light beams shot out, hitting each paper man. Some of these paper figures burned and some turned yellow, but they all fell to the ground. But these paper figures seemed to be endless, and new paper figures kept getting in through the gaps in the elevator. Chu Zhao did not dare to neglect at all, and solved them one after another. At this time, he was very glad that he had just redeemed the money the day before yesterday. You have to acquire new bloodline skills, otherwise this situation would not be so easy to deal with. However, just as Chu Zhao was clinging to one side of the wall and constantly dealing with the paper figures, suddenly, two pale hands appeared on the side of the elevator wall where Chu Zhao was leaning. The timing of the appearance of these two hands happened to be at the time when Chu Zhao's mind was completely distracted by those paper figures. Buzz. His two hands were directly placed on Chu Zhao's eyes, like a game he often played when he was a child. Your friend covered your eyes with his hands behind your back. Guess who I am? But this time, it was fatal. Just when Chu Zhao was about to struggle, the hands withdrew again, and at this moment, two paper figures were approaching. Poof! Poof! Ah 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 ah! Chu Zhao's screams echoed in the building. He curled up and knelt on the ground. His eyes were already bloody, but more and more paper figures penetrated around him. The air in the mountainous area has always been good. The natural factors here have restricted the economic development here, but the restrictions on economic development have preserved a good natural environment here. Therefore, everything actually has its own two sides. After coming out of the tent, Subai washed up by the stream. Behind him was the orphanage. His son was in it, but he couldn't go in and take him out for the time being, but fortunately, it should be soon. When I returned here yesterday evening, the tents and all the living utensils were still there, but Chen Ryu was no longer here, and she didn't know what she was doing. Of course, she could come and go freely, and she didn't need to report to Subai and others. Buddha got up earlier than Subai. On the hilltop opposite, he vaguely saw Buddha communicating with a few people. Everything should be done quickly. It is expected that the engineering team will be stationed on the opposite mountainside starting tomorrow. The temple. Of course, the temple is just a small temple. Sudbai has seen the drawings, and it looks a bit like the small temple that was transformed into the old version of the animation Journey to the West when Sun Wukong and Erlang Shen fought. Fatty was still snoring in the tent. Sudbai was planning to cook something, but Buddha, who had finished talking to the construction team, came over and said, "The poor monk will make some tea and treat it as breakfast." If someone does it for him, Sudbai is naturally happy to be the shopkeeper. After a while, when the aroma of butter tea filled the air, the snoring of the fat man suddenly stopped, and then the fat man walked out while rubbing his eyes. "It smells so good." Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Some things will change, but some natures are difficult to change. Perhaps, they are unwilling to change. Even in the past, everyone cherished the time of being ordinary people in the real world, let alone now. Everyone there is almost a countdown alarm clock on my head, and days like this are even more precious. Sudbai still remembered that when he first met Fatty, he taught Fatty how to eat instant noodles from a bucket in a hotel. But later he found out that every time he stayed with Fatty in a hotel, Fatty would dig out the bucket noodles from the bottom, pour them over, soak them, and then eat them again. Just go back and you won't have to pay for instant noodles when you check out. Just as Lord Buddha was serving tea to everyone, Sudbai's cell phone rang. It turned out to be Sunar calling him. In fact, since the last incident, Sunar and he had not been in contact much. There are no barriers between us in our lives and circles, but we all have a sense of proportion. Sudbai answered the phone. "Hey, Sudbai, is that you?" Sunar's voice was a little cold, as if he was restraining his emotions. "It's me, what's going on?" Sudbai asked while taking the butter tea handed over by Buddha. "Chu Zhao died in the middle of the night yesterday." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 956. In front of Chengdu Airport T2 terminal, Sudbai stood here alone without any luggage. He looked more like a wanderer than a passenger, because there seemed to be no obvious focus in his eyes, and his whole body exuded it has a loose atmosphere. It's a pity that the airport is full of passengers coming and going. Although many men and women look back deliberately when passing by Sudbai, they are not likely to strike up a conversation or do any other special behavior. Of course, it was not because Sudbai was so handsome that he was earth-shatteringly handsome, but because in this state of mind, some of his aura leaked out inadvertently. It was like a nobleman walking out of a slum. Everyone's life level and the bloodlines are no longer on the same level, so it will naturally give people a feeling of standing out from the crowd. Chu Zhao's death, to be honest, did not bring a big blow to Sudbai, but the signs of Chu Zhao's death and the pressing atmosphere brought about by his death really made Sudbai. I felt very depressed. The maximum period of 2 years, the last 2 years, before this, at most made Sudbai feel a little upset, but after all, there are still 2 years, anything can happen, and when he learned the news of Chu Zhao's death finally, Sudbai clearly felt the rhythm and pulse of the end. Life is a race against time. This is a common chicken soup that reminds people to cherish time and youth, but it seems particularly true when used on people like Sudbai. The countdown is approaching step by step. After passing the security check, we boarded the plane. Fatty helped book the flight. He specially booked a first-class cabin for Sudbai. The stewardess diligently delivered a pair of disposable slippers for Sudbai to put on. Sudbai shook his head and said he didn't need them. Sudbai just stared at the porthole in trance. 2.5 hours later, the vibration of the plane landing made Sudbai break away from the long-lasting emotion. As soon as he got off the plane, Sudbai saw Sunar standing at the exit waiting for him. Sunar was wearing a black tights and looked a bit like a female motorcycle enthusiast. In fact, she also had a helmet under her left arm. It seems that I haven't seen her for a long time. Sudbai looked at Sunar in front of him, and Suner was also looking at him. From Suner's perspective, she felt that Subai had lost a lot of weight. Subai felt that Suner's aura was much more solid than before, and there was a vague tendency to be closer to a senior person. This rate of progress is already amazing. For some reason, Subai suddenly remembered the scene when Suner went to his detective agency to cook for him when he was injured, but both of them knew that many things could never go back to the past. This damn fate. And this damn broadcast. Suner turned around and walked directly outside. Subai followed her. Sure enough, there was a motorcycle parked on the runway outside. The motorcycle was locked. There were several Pudong airport administrators nearby who seemed to be planning to deal with it. Suner walked over and waved her palm to emit a burst of crimson mist. These dedicated administrators immediately fell asleep. She threw the other helmet hanging on the front of the car to Subai and stepped on it first. The car body opened its chains. Subai put on his helmet and sat on it. For motorcycle enthusiasts, the roar of a motorcycle engine seems to be the most moving sound of nature in the world. Just imagine, a woman with a voluptuous figure wearing a black tights is driving a motorcycle, and you are sitting behind her. This is a scene and experience that many men dream of, especially since Subai and Suner almost developed a relationship before. However, neither of them have such thoughts at the moment. Chu Zhao has just died. It would be too disrespectful to have these thoughts or do these things at this time. Suner drove very fast, running through red lights and even driving in the wrong direction. Of course, for her now, it was difficult to kill her in a car accident. She had extraordinary reaction speed and physical fitness. As for Subai, not to mention. 20 minutes later, Suner drove Subai to the entrance of the cemetery. It's still that cemetery. Subai still remembers when Ji Zhen and Boss Liang set up a trap here to test him. Of course, what remains fresh in his memory is that the scene predicted in the painting really happened here. Even now, Subai didn't even know if the result of that rehearsal had changed because of his own efforts. Chu Zhao was found to have died accidentally. He fell down the stairs and died. His family buried his ashes elsewhere. I stole them out. As he said that, Suner walked to the hidden bushes in front, and then put a black. The urn was taken out. Subai didn't expect that Suner would hide Chu Zhao's urn here so carelessly. You're not afraid of losing him? This was the first thing Subai said to Suner after getting off the plane. It was a joke, but it didn't sound so funny now. Who would steal this? Suner shook his head, and then walked in with Subai. It was still the same place, the same 3 rows of tombstones. Without Subai doing anything, Suner squatted down and opened the cement board, then put the urn in. Then, she stood up and faced Chu Zhao's name on the tombstone. Photo says, "You rest first, and we will accompany you later." From front to back, Subai seemed to have just come to attend a funeral that couldn't be more simple. Subai still remembered that he was here a year ago. Chu Zhao deliberately lied to him that Suner was dead, and then Suner walked out again, but this time, it was obviously not that kind of friendly joke. Chu Zhao? Really dead? Looking at the black and white photo on the tombstone, Subai didn't feel much sadness, but felt helpless. He had saved Chu Zhao once before, but this time, he had no time to react. However, having said that, it is hard to say whether he can save himself now. As for Chu Zhao and Suner, they probably have little chance. "Are you hungry?" Suner asked. "A bit," Subai replied. Leaving Chu Zhao here, the two of them walked out of the cemetery again. The funeral ended like this. Suner was still driving the car, and Subai sat in the back. 10 minutes later, Suner stopped in front of a convenience store. When she walked out, she had 2 bottles of beer in her hand. She threw the beer to Subai, and then she continued drive. In the end, Suner stopped by the Huangpu River. She opened a can of beer herself and handed it to Subai. Then she opened a can herself and drank it without toasting. Soon, Sunar drank all the can of beer. Subai sat next to him and took a sip. He didn't take the second can of beer from Sunar's hand. He said such boring things as drinking would hurt the body. For Sunar now, it's hard for alcohol to cause any harm to her body. What's rare in Shanghai today is good weather, and the sun is a bit bright, but the mood of the two people is not sunny at all. Sunar drank 3 cans in a row and then slammed the beer out of her hand. She was very angry. Subai knew what she was angry about. When she was angry, alcohol couldn't anesthetize her at all. How did Chu Zhao die? Subai asked. I don't know, but I will go to his house tonight. That thing should be near his house. Subai nodded and avenged Chu Zhao, which was considered the last thing he did for this former friend. Since that thing can kill Chu Zhao, even if Sunar is stronger than Chu Zhao, it is not so safe. Subai, we are really going to die, Sunar suddenly said. I have always thought that we will turn danger into disaster every time, just like the protagonist in a novel. We will continue to live, no matter what kind of danger we encounter, we can stumble and continue to live. I know that this is my fantasy, a fantasy that is simply impossible to realize. Subai didn't speak, but took another sip of beer. Chu Zhao died so suddenly. When her mother called me to inform me last night, I was completely stunned. Sunar paused and continued, to be honest, my death today, the sadness and emotions were not entirely due to Chu's omen. Maybe, it was because I saw my own ending in the future. You died in such an inexplicable way. Your relatives and friends all regarded it as a normal accident. They accepted the news of your death calmly and faced this fact calmly. This is terrible, really terrible, especially when you see this kind of thing happening in front of you. Sunar raised his head, as if to suppress the tears in his eyes. Subai, how long do you think I can live? 2 years, maybe less. Subai told Sunar about this without much mental struggle. This might make Sunar lose his determination to move on and live in the story world, but it could let her better arrange her remaining years. In 2 years at most, all the listeners who have not been enlightened will die. Even those who are enlightened may not survive. Sunar's body trembled slightly at this moment, as if she was digesting the news that Subai had given her. She believed that only people at a very high level could know the news, because the audience circle at that level where she was simply not aware of the news. I had never heard of it, because it was like a bomb that would definitely send the entire audience into a hysterical panic. Thank you. After a long time, Sunar said. You're welcome, Subai replied. Are there only 2 years left? Sunar smiled self-deprecatingly, and then suddenly said, there is a blind date arranged by my family for me the day after tomorrow. Subai waited to hear what was going on. I want to be pregnant once. I want to have a child of my own, surrogacy and in vitro fertilization. This may be the only trace I can leave in this world after my death. Subai didn't say how selfish Sunar's idea was and how bad it would be for the future of the child. He understood Sunar's thoughts. Of course, Subai didn't say just use my sperm. Compared to Sunar's freedom and ease, he was even less willing to bear the consequences of this. I can do it like a child. Subai suddenly paused. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 957. Subai didn't know whether Sunar was acting impulsively or if he really had this plan, and he didn't want to know. In fact, in the context of the countdown to the audience destruction plan, the more he left behind, the more he would bring to himself. The pain is getting worse. Yang Yinger once said that she is aloof. The reason is simply that ordinary people look down on her and those she likes don't want to take responsibility. The so-called responsibility here is not alimony in the ordinary sense. These things are not a problem for Subai, but the care and fetters it may bring to him. In the final analysis, Subai, I also admit that I am a selfish person. The first consideration in everything is whether I can live more easily. Everyone wants to live without any worries, and they also have the instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages to protect themselves wisely. The two people did not speak any more, but stood quietly on the Huangpu River. This may be regarded as the end of the funeral for Chu Zhao, but rather than mourning Chu Zhao's departure, it is better to say that they are mourning themselves in the future. The kind of ending that may and will be faced. To mourn Chu Zhao is also to mourn oneself in advance. When the sun set, Suner broke away from that emotion, turned around, and walked towards his motorcycle. I'm going to avenge Chu Zhao. Subai nodded, said nothing, and sat directly on it. Although Suner's talent is very high, it is almost impossible to achieve enlightenment in 2 years. Even if he is going to die, Subai does not want to be so cruel that he loses 2 former friends in a short period of time. When making friends in ancient times, people actually have this mentality and personality, and their bottom line is torn apart and lowered time and time again. Thinking back to when Subai first learned that Suner would die at a certain period of time, Subai was nervous and painful. In the end, he even did not hesitate to enter the story world himself to rescue Suner. But this time, in this kind of situation, under the general trend, whether Subai himself can be saved is still unknown. Furthermore, Chu Zhao is dead, and the head has been opened, and the following things will be more acceptable than before. Soon, the two came to Chu Zhao's community. As soon as they entered the community gate, Subai felt a strange aura, as if a pair of eyes that he thought were very hidden were staring at him. Since the thing that killed Chu Zhao was nearby, he and Suner should be like 2 huge light bulbs in his eyes, and he couldn't help but be attracted to them. Today's audience is like dirty laundry to the radio, but the radio does not mind using these clothes as linen to wipe the dust and dirty places in the house before throwing them away, so as to reuse the last bit of waste. Suner stopped the car at the entrance of the corridor. She planned to go upstairs to see Chu Zhao's room first, but Subai grabbed her arm. No need to bother. When Suner heard this, she didn't say anything, but stood aside. She knew the gap between herself and Subai, so maybe the questions she thought were difficult were not worth mentioning in Subai's eyes, even if they were not worth mentioning. Something just killed Chu Zhao. Subai is a strong man who has strengthened his body, and his soul and body have also been fused, so Subai has some disadvantages in terms of mental power, but this disadvantage depends on who he is compared with, at least for now. In this situation, it was not difficult for him to find that thing. It's like a Chinese college student doing elementary school math problems. Subai's eyes looked at the street lamp on one side. It was not completely dark yet, so the street lamp was not on yet, but Subai still walked over and stood under the street lamp. He raised his head and looked at the lamp above. Cap. Suddenly, pieces of white paper flew down from above. This scene was a bit like students picking up their test papers and information from a high building at the end of the high school or college entrance examination and throwing them out. The falling papers instantly turned into pieces of paper figures, and the falling speed also instantly became no less than the speed of bullets. They began to cut into Subai's body, as if they wanted to kill Subai in that instant. Cut into meat paste. Subai stood there without moving. He really didn't need to move. His current body was first transformed into an ancient zombie and then purified and improved again by the backhand left by Fugui. His body was so powerful that it was not even compared to the big guys. At the level of a real boss, it is very difficult for listeners to temper their bodies to be like him. Buzz buzz. Every piece of paper began to crumble after touching Subai's body. After a while, a pile of scraps of paper appeared at Subai's feet. That being seemed to be a little confused about how to face the situation, because at this moment, Subai felt the panic and uneasiness in the other person's emotions. It might be because the radio had increased the audience's attraction to these things. As usual, judging from the situation, These heretics who do not conform to the middle-level scientific and technological civilized society also know how to protect themselves when they encounter the iron plate. They are not stupid. In fact, being able to lurk in this world and survive means that they are really smart. But this time, the other party just hesitated and ran away without giving in. Subai stretched out his hand and gently pulled upwards. There was a violent sound of tearing cloth, and a paper man that was much larger than those paper men was forcefully pulled out of hiding by Subai. "Come out." The paper man who just attacked Subai was in the form of pieces of paper, but this paper man looked like the kind of paper man used to be burned during funerals in rural areas. It had a skeleton, a thrush, a bit of sand, and even, to another extent, if you put a human's clothes on him, it would be difficult for you to find anything unusual about him when walking in a crowd. Paperman can be said to be one of Subai's early dreams. He remembered that the first serious story world he experienced was full of dangers, and the murderer was his roommate Louhi at the time. At this moment, when he saw this kind of paper man again, Subai certainly didn't feel that kind of fear in his heart. Just like when a person saw a cockroach when he was young, he would scream in fright. When he grows up, he can basically do it unless he is very timid. To calmly step on it and send it to heaven. "Let me go. Let me go. Let me go." The paper man began to beg for mercy. His intelligence did not seem to be very high because the language used to beg for mercy was too lacking and monotonous. Sunar came closer and looked at the paper man who was held by Subai with one hand and had no power to fight back. He still couldn't believe that such a guy had killed Chu Zhao not long ago. Subai pulled the paper man in front of him. The paper man was struggling constantly, but his strength was not enough for Subai. Any of his techniques and spells were completely blocked by Subai. "Death, there is no room for trouble at all. In fact, Subai can destroy this paper man right now, but since he is helping Chu Zhao to avenge him, he has to do it more carefully." The ancient Lianzhuo and Zhuju clans seem not to be suitable for ordinary people in modern times, but it doesn't matter when it comes to the heretics that this kind of broadcasting is intended to clean up. Subai's palm exerted slight force, and the paper man's body began to wrinkle. Subai kept controlling the heat, and then his mental power directly penetrated into the paper man's body. He would like to see it. This paper man. What the hell is it? Sunjia village is located near Longhu Mountain in Jiangxi province. This village has always been isolated from the outside world. Although there are some people who go out to work and some go to school, they are a minority after all. The vast majority of the population in the village still lives in the village. The local government we also came to engage in tourism development and other economic development plans, but they were all rejected by this village. Later, this village was truly forgotten. After all, they lived in poverty and did not cause trouble, nor did they have any emotions. Naturally, there was no need to pay too much attention. At this time, it was just entering the evening, and the men, women, and children in the village gathered at the entrance of the ancestral hall after dinner as usual. The old village chief first offered incense, and then most of the villagers started offering incense, and the way they offered incense was unique. There is a small water tank at the entrance of the ancestral hall. What is in the water tank is not water, but blood that exudes a strong fishy smell. Everyone reaches out to rub a little blood on the incense before offering it, and the remaining half who have not put the incense stand there. When the incense burned, the white smoke mixed with the smell of blood did not float around, but surged straight towards the group of people who did not burn incense. There were men, women, old and young, and the white smoke was inhaled by their nostrils. As they entered, their bodies began to sway, and a blush gradually appeared on their frighteningly pale faces. This scene is very weird and reminds people of Hong Kong ghost movies from the 1990s. However, at this moment, a tablet enshrined in the ancestral hall suddenly shook and made a violent noise. The crowd immediately burst into an uproar. No one knew what happened. The old village chief and several older people around him. The old man looked serious at this time, and several people took action together to stabilize the tablet. Snapped. In an instant, the tablet shattered, releasing a stream of dust. The dust remained solid, and a human face appeared. This was the face of a young man, and his eyes seemed to have a terrifying penetrating look. Lee was scanning himself. It's this man, he destroyed the Shikigami. The old village chief was angry and scared. He was angry that the Shikigami deliberately released by the village was destroyed, but he was afraid that the other party's method was almost beyond the limit. His imagination. At this time, among the people who were smoking incense, there was a young man who looked like a young man. Seeing the scene in front of him, a look of disbelief appeared on his face, and at the same time he exclaimed, "Subai!" Subai's eyes also focused on the young man for a moment. Immediately, before the dust dissipated, he left 2 words. Waiting. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 958. Hey, what's wrong with you? You should come back when you're done. You're actually traveling everywhere. The fat man's voice sounded very harsh on the phone. Of course, it was also because there was the sound of bulldozers, so the fat man had to shout at the top of his lungs when he called. The construction of the small temple seems to have begun. I'm better than you, Subai replied. You are really free. We don't have much time left. 2 years, maybe less than 2 years. At this time, you don't want to calm down and make a breakthrough. You are still running around. I'm better than you. Why did you let that woman come here, just to cook for us? Damn it, I knew that the police officer named Chu died in an accident. You were worried that she would have an accident if she continued alone, so you brought her here, but our place is a temple. Do you want to change it into a nunnery? I'm better than you. The fat man was silent for a long time before he had to give up and said calmly, can you change it to something else? Her flight will arrive in Chengdu tomorrow morning. You are responsible for picking her up. Fatty took a deep breath, obviously preparing for a bigger roar. Dabai, do you feel that you have a little? Do. Subai hung up the phone. It was Subai's suggestion to ask Suner to go to Sichuan, but Suner didn't seem to intend to live there permanently. She said she would go and see the place where the little guy was staying and then come back. Death sooner or later would be death anyway, so there was no need to let him go again. I continue to be restrained. Since it is the last period of my life, I can take off my burdens and experience some wonderful things that I have never experienced before. Some characteristics of a person can only be stimulated in a specific environment, such as Suner. She used to be considered a woman, but she was far from being so calm. However, Subai felt that she might be completely desperate. That's why I was completely liberated. As for myself, Fatty and the others, it was because of the little remaining hope that they had to struggle and not let go. Putting the phone back in his pocket, Subai leaned his head against the bus window. Yes, Subai chose to take the bus to Longhu Mountain and then go to find the village. Although he knew the approximate location, he still needed to explore a bit. Only then could he be really sure. After all, mental strength was one of Subai's weaknesses, so naturally he couldn't be completely accurate. Moreover, the most important thing is that Subai came to Longhu Mountain in Jiangxi province this time, saying that he was here to avenge Chuzhou, but in fact he was not that urgent, and even wanted to go on an outing with the little guy who was robbed. That night was nothing like the anger or the hysteria. Subai felt that he should be sadder, but after trying it, he still felt that it should not be difficult for him. Blood Corpse is gone, Fugui is gone, and Chuzhou is gone. In fact, I have learned to be relieved and accept some things a long time ago. The only thing that makes me a little confused is when will my parents let me experience whiteness? The joy of giving gifts to people with black hair? Through the perspective of the paper man, Subai was a little surprised that he actually met his college roommate again. Subai remembered that he was shot to death by himself. Because the broadcast eliminated the impact, He was determined to have a heart attack. The illness suddenly occurred, but he was not dead yet, or rather not completely dead. A young man who changed his name and came out of that mysterious village to go to college and wanted to experience it. Because he suffered the blow of so-called love and low self-esteem, he used his own means to kill people and take revenge in extremely cruel ways. The story is indeed it's a bit old-fashioned, but now, doing these things as someone other than an audience member is quite novel. The bus drove very fast, and there were not many cars on the road. Soon, at a service station before reaching Longhu Mountain, the driver parked the bus so everyone could go to eat or use the toilet. Subai did not get off the bus and took a nap while sitting on the bus. The afternoon sun was not so strong and it shone lazily on his body, which was very enjoyable. At this moment, a kind of whistle sounded, playing in a very ups and downs. Subai didn't recognize what the music was. Although it had a bit of the classical charm of Oriental music, it was also filled with a feeling of vastness and helplessness. As if there is no place for him in the whole world. Music, chess, calligraphy, and painting actually have the function of expressing people's inner moods, and this piece of music has the power to touch people's hearts, which has a lot to do with the performer's skills and emotional investment. Subai looked sideways out of the car window and found that about 30 meters away from here, there was a man in a red robe sitting there playing an instrument similar to xiao, but it should not be xiao, like instruments that I modified. In front of the man, there was a smaller person sitting there, also wearing a red robe, looking like a monkey and a child. In fact, Subai knew clearly that the little man was neither a monkey nor a child, but the corpse of his ancestor, and that man's clothes and performing arts posture should be that of a Mohican. The Mohicans worship their ancestors, so like the Egyptians, they like to make mummies of their ancestors and take them with them. The Mohicans originally belonged to a branch of North American Indians, but later when white people set foot on North American soil, they treated the indigenous Indians. The massacre was carried out. At that time, whether soldiers, cowboys, or even priests, they were proud to hunt Indians. A while ago, the Mohicans attracted attention because of the movie The Last of the Mohicans. Of course, the most well-known is the battle between Beckham and Balotelli at the 2000 European Cup and the 2012 European Cup. Mohawk hairstyle, and this ethnic group is actually almost extinct, both culturally and genetically. Many tourists had gathered around the performer, and many people even came up to put money in front of him. Subai shook his head. The clothes and musical instruments on the performer were all valuable. Although the man's skin was a bit dark, Subai shook his head. But it's hard to tell if he's not a Mohican. He's more like a performance artist who experiences life. Suddenly, the music suddenly became clear, and Subai's eyes froze for a moment. The Mohican who was playing also looked towards the bus where Subai was sitting. Subai could see that the other person was connected to the bus. That meaningful smile. The other party actually hit it so deeply, and he actually missed it just now. Subai was frightened but not panicked. After all, there were not many things in this world that could truly threaten him. The other party slowly stood up, and the tune of the song suddenly changed at this time. At this time, ordinary people in the service station fell to the ground and fell into a drowsy state. At this time, the other party also walked towards Subai. That ancestor the mummy made of corpses also floated up and followed along. Subai lightly knocked on the bus window, and the glass on this side of the bus shattered instantly. Then, Subai jumped off the bus, holding his hands and watching the other person approaching him step by step. I really didn't expect that I could meet a high-level audience here. The other person spoke Chinese fluently and had a special accent. Japanese? Subai asked. Yes, I'm here, Saburichi Murasaka, please give me your advice. The other party took Chang Xiao and bowed to Subai. Subai didn't say anything. Is it possible that a senior audience member from Japan happened to be experiencing life by performing performance art on his way to Longhu Mountain? Do you really think that high-end listeners are like cabbages on the roadside? What's the matter? Subai asked. That village, please be merciful, the other party said with a relieved smile. Fortunately, you are not very murderous, so you gave me a chance to come and make peace. My ancestor accompanied Jian Zhen to Japan when he crossed east. Has been spreading in Japan for many generations. This village is actually the ancestral line of my family. Therefore, please forgive them. I am willing to pay a certain price for this. I just ask you to let this village continue to exist peacefully. They are actually very low-key. A friend of mine died, Subai said. I deeply regret this, but you should also realize that the recent broadcasts have increased our attraction to those abnormal creatures, which is why this unpleasant thing happened. If I am not wrong, that friend of yours should also be a listener, right? A friend of mine died, Subai continued to repeat, but just now he and Fatty could only be regarded as teasing between friends, but this time, the anger and impatience increased with each repetition. I'm extremely sorry, but I can see that you don't have serious murderous intentions, so I hope you can be magnanimous for once. In our capacity, there is really no need to argue with them, right? Subai sighed, smiled, and said, actually, I didn't really plan to massacre the village. I was also hesitant. When Saburo Uchimura heard this, a smile appeared on his face. But you suddenly came out and started making nonsense, which makes me really want to completely wipe out that village. What should I do? Subai shrugged, saying that everything was your fault. Baga, Saburo Uchimura's face had lost all the previous flattery and flattery. Wouldn't it be enough if you did this earlier? What nonsense are you playing? It's a waste of time. Subai pinched his wrist. That village relied on human blood to sustain the lives of the people who should have died in the village, allowing them to turn into paper figures and continue to survive. The paper figures who killed Chu Zhao were just arranged by them to go out secretly. It's just a tool for killing people to obtain the source of blood and souls. If it hadn't been for Chu Zhao's incident, Subai might not have come here specifically to do justice for heaven, but this time, it was all a cancer anyway, and if it was wiped out in one fell swoop, Subai wouldn't feel the slightest pang in his heart. Sir. The mummy in front of Saburo Uchimura floated in front of him. There may be one thing you don't know, that is, after reaching the advanced audience level, our Japanese audience is more eager for quick success than you. Chinese audiences have more advantages. Oh? I'll wait and see. Subai licked his tongue between his lips and said, besides, I'm more curious about your real purpose of preserving that village. Let Subai believe that the senior audience member from Japan in front of him came to be a lobbyist out of kinship, and make Subai believe that Japan's war of aggression against China was really to establish the concept of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 959. Subai has never been able to determine the strength level of the other party, which means that the other party has extremely advanced hidden aura skills. The living environment of Japanese and Korean listeners is indeed much easier than that in China. It may even be that the broadcasters feel that they are too relaxed, so they deliberately, in order to create conflicts between Japan and South Korea, as well as between audiences in the Chinese circle, Subai had previously entered a story world with Japanese and Korean audiences. There was a linear reward in which the two sides hunted each other and counted their heads. And their attitude towards bloodline and enhancement is not a means to save life, but more like a pious inheritance. This model may not have great advantages before senior people, and may even have some disadvantages, but after advanced listeners, they have accumulated knowledge in the past. The things accumulated through understanding can often play a big role. For example, this is a bit similar to ancient martial arts. One person regards a knife as his own life and the inheritance of the meaning of his life, while the other person only regards the knife as a sharp weapon for cutting people and only cares about the knife. There may not be much difference between the two swordsmen at the beginning, whether they are sharp enough or not, and whether they can cut people easily or not. The latter may be able to suppress the former, but once both of them reach the peak of their swordsmanship, the former will undoubtedly become more incompetent. Made in heaven. The first one to launch the offensive was Subai. To be honest, Subai was really looking for a fight. In Lashan a while ago, after advancing, he first encountered Chen Ru's spar, and then met two Qin dynasty masters one after another. It can be said that Subai didn't even enjoy the fight with Fusu and the armored man. Fusu's bronze chain really suppressed him, while the armored man held him down and brutally tortured him. Even if he won in the end, there's not much sense of accomplishment either. This time, Subai planned to have a good time and then meet his old classmates. Boom! Subai's speed was actually very fast, but he was still intercepted by an invisible barrier. The mummy sitting cross-legged and floating in mid-air naturally formed a barrier, restricting Subai from the outside. A smile appeared on the corner of Saburo Uchimura's mouth, and the long flute in his hand was put to his lips again. For a moment, the simple and desolate music came again. In a trance, it seemed like corpses dripping with blood appeared all around. They are shouting. They are roaring. They are struggling. The strong unwillingness was so strong that it seemed to turn into water and flow out. Saburo Uchimura dresses himself as a Mohican performance artist, which means that he has a deep knowledge and understanding of the culture of this nation that is about to become extinct, but his purpose is not that pure. He is to bring that nation that is almost extinct into the anger and unwillingness accumulated over the past hundreds of years were integrated into the sound of his flute, forming a technique of his own. This is a method that goes beyond the ordinary meaning. Subai can't do it, nor can Chen Ru, a woman who only knows how to be fierce, and the fat man can't do it either. Among the people Subai knows, maybe only monks have the ability to copy. The sorrow and weeping of a nation turned into a purgatory at this time, forming a terrifying whirlpool, and the center of the whirlpool was where Subai was. Even Subai had to admit that this was really a big deal. It was really amazing to hold a disappearing nation in his hands and turn it into a power equivalent to a magic weapon. However, Subai was still calm and he stepped back. For one step, he completely turned a blind eye to the whining and roaring around him. Then, he bent his body slightly, raised his fist, and blasted directly at the barrier formed by the mummy in front of him. Boom! The roar this time was so violent that the mummy could not withstand the terrifying force of Subai's blow and flew backwards. You are not affected at all? No, you actually have no soul. Uchimura Saburo seemed to finally understand something when he saw that his whirlpool had no effect on Subai. Subai got a chance to get close to Saburo Uchimura. Saburo Uchimura waved his long flute down and hit Subai directly in the face. Subai raised one hand and grabbed the opponent's long flute. Just follow the trend and punch it. To be honest, maybe it was because of his bloodline or because all his wealth was spent when he advanced to the advanced audience. As a result, Subai didn't have any regular magical weapons on his body. Maybe if the armor was adjusted well in the future, it could be used. Wearing it and using it, of course, his body itself is an extremely powerful magic weapon. Saburo Uchimura fought with Subai 3 times in succession. Although he was completely at a disadvantage, he was not seriously injured. Subai had an absolute advantage but was unable to turn this advantage into a victory. The next moment, the mummy that had just been punched away by Subai flew back again. Its body began to slowly expand, changing from the shape of a child to that of a normal person, and it pounced on it like an ape. On Subai's back, he opened his mouth and bit Subai's neck. Click. The sound of metal collision was heard, and the ape's sharp teeth actually broke. However, there were only a few white marks on Subai's neck, not even the skin was broken. This scene made Saburo Uchimura's eyes become slightly gloomier, because the reason why he was able to barely support himself in the close confrontation with Tsubai at this time was just to use other means to regain the distance between himself and Tsubai. But Tsubai's physical abnormality really frightened him. Click. The long flute collapsed directly at this moment, and a profound magic circle pattern immediately appeared under Saburo Uchimura's feet, and the space on this side began to distort. The other party didn't seem to intend to continue to entangle with Tsubai. Although the fighting time was short, Saburo Uchimura knew that he had no hope of victory. If everyone stayed farther away, he might still be able to make a difference. But at the moment, if you continue to struggle, you will only be defeated. But Tsubai had no reason to let the other party leave so easily. At that moment, Tsubai's hand directly penetrated into the magic circle. Ah! A roar came from Tsubai's throat, and the hand he stretched out began to twist and deform rapidly at this time. The space there had been folded and changed, which was equivalent to a knife that was constantly cutting. Goodbye, sir. Saburo Uchimura's figure began to fade away, and he had to implement the second plan, because the high-level audience provoked by the people in that village was not simple. In fact, Uchimura himself was a little helpless. Of course, if he took this opportunity it would be good to persuade them to move out, at least the one in the village. Did I let you go? Tsubai's eyes suddenly turned red at this time, and a layer of light green light began to linger around his body. His twisted and deformed palm returned to its original state at this time. If you look carefully, you can actually find Tsubai's right hand and most of it. The arm that was stretched out was in a dynamic process of collapse and recovery. The twisted space kept squeezing and breaking Tsubai's arm. However, because Tsubai's recovery speed from the second turn of the ancient stiffness was really amazing, causing his arm to be no longer whether it looks or is practical, it is actually complete. The backhand left by Fugui in that place and the infusion of energy from the bronze chain helped Tsubai regain his physique, and secondly, to a certain extent, they made up for the shortcomings of Guzong's second turn, making Guzong's second turn the side effects are now so minimal that they are almost negligible. Tsubai's hand directly grasped Saburo Uchimura's ankle. Saburo Uchimura's half-disappeared figure had to solidify again. For the first time, something called fear appeared in his eyes when he looked at Tsubai. What I am facing is a reckless man who can only fight with his body. His fighting method has no beauty or charm at all, but the scary thing is that the opponent can completely eat you and crush you with his body. It's simple, rough and extremely efficient. Boom. Tsubai waved his arm, and Saburo Uchimura's body was hit hard by Tsubai. His body created a 100-meter-long ravine on the ground, sliding from the service station to the cliff on one side. When his body was close to the cliff, Uchimura's Saburo forcibly stopped the inertia, but his body also made a crunching sound at this time. It was obvious that at that moment, he had no idea how many bones in his body were broken. Tsubai didn't give Uchimura any chance to breathe. It was the most correct choice not to waste one more second before he could kill his opponent. A dead opponent is the cutest opponent. Most of the villains in many film and television works, in fact, they all died from talking too much. Saburo Uchimura was still standing, but this body was almost destroyed. He took a deep breath, resisted the discomfort of his body about to collapse, patted his chest with one hand, turned his lips, and recited the incantation quickly out. Shikigamai Shuten Daji. Uchimura's heart immediately released a stream of black smoke. When Tsubai's figure approached again, the black smoke had completely enveloped the memory, and his figure began to completely transform into smoke that filled the sky. Tsubai had to stop. After all, when the opponent's figure is no longer completely substantial, it is difficult for a pure physical blow to find a point of force. Uchimura did not choose to run away directly, but continued to stay in the air. He seemed to feel that it was too embarrassing to leave directly after being beaten so hard. That village is very important to us, is there really no room for negotiation? So, what qualifications do you have to discuss with me? Subai asked with a smile. Then, Subai closed his eyes. In his mind, a vampire figure tied to a cross appeared. That figure was actually gone. He had summoned him to kill one last time. The boss's clone has since disappeared between heaven and earth, but the inheritance that the other party once gave him is still there. Next moment, Subai's body turned into a majestic blood mist, like a sea of blood, and the setting sun at this time. It blends together perfectly. Come on, don't hum. Continue. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 960. Many things are done because they make people happy, such as eating, sleeping, playing games, and beating people. Subai really hasn't beaten someone so heartily for a long time. In the last story world, he and Fatty became ordinary people. It was already very frustrating. After that, the people and things he encountered in succession were quite special. Therefore, at this time, Subai vented his anger happily on Mr. Uchimura. As for the other party's nationality and identity, Subai didn't think too much about it. Even if a domestic audience had stopped him at that moment, Subai would have beaten him up. At this time, in the sky above the long-distance highway service station, a group of black mist was being chased by a bloody light. This chase was actually extremely devoid of aesthetics. It was a bit like playing a game called Head Eater in the last century. It was nothing more than a process of chasing, biting, breaking free, chasing again, and biting again. It seems a bit boring. But Subai never tired of it, because the black mist had begun to become thinner and thinner under his repeated bites. Finally, the black mist fell down and hit one side of the rock wall, revealing Saburo Uchimura's figure again. At this time, Saburo Uchimura's body was dripping with blood, and his bones were exposed in many places, and in his heart, there were also a cloud of black energy kept moving in and out, causing him great pain. Subai's figure reappeared beside him. Compared with Saburo Uchimura's embarrassment, Subai looked like he had just finished his warm-up, as if he had just started to move and had not really exerted his strength. He said to Uchimura before, "What qualifications do you have to negotiate terms with me?" Now, he is just using practical actions to tell Uchimura that what he said is correct. Uchimura Saburo gritted his teeth. There was black blood between his teeth. There was no resentment in his eyes, but he looked a little calm. He took a deep breath and said, "I give up. I won't stop you from doing anything." This was considered a bow. In the face of Subai's absolute strength, Uchimura truly realized that he really had no possibility of making a comeback. Logically speaking, Japanese and Korean audiences of the same level could basically take advantage of Chinese audiences of the same level. Because their understanding and application of bloodline and magic are generally deeper than the latter, but Uchimura can only lament that he was unlucky and encountered an absolute steel plate. He. Subai smiled, but still approached Saburo Uchimura. Saburo Uchimura did not resist anymore, and he had no intention of sneak attack. From a causal point of view, even if Subai put aside the motive of revenge for his former friends, Subai is now running over and erasing the villages that do not conform to the theme of this world plane is natural and in line with the approval of the broadcast. Uchimura took action to stop it, which is not responsible for the cause. Now that the strong and weak are already clearly distinguished, if he continues to be tough, the other party would have reason to kill him directly. Seeing such miserable Uchimura, Subai squatted down like him, touched his pocket, took out 2 cigarettes, and handed one to Uchimura. Uchimura took the cigarette, and then Subai handed over a lighter and helped light it. This made Uchimura a little confused. Sudbai's attitude changed a little too quickly. But Uchimura still put the cigarette in his mouth, took a puff, and then asked, "Sir, what else do you want to do?" "Nothing, I just want to see what it looks like when a cigarette comes out of my chest after smoking. It's really interesting." Sudbai pointed at Uchimura's chest. It was almost broken and his ribs were exposed. When Uchimura just smoked, the smoke came in from his mouth, but because of the broken body, some smoke came out of his body. After hearing this explanation, Saburo Uchimura's face immediately darkened. This Chinese man was completely playing with himself as a monkey. But Saburo Uchimura restrained himself, because this Chinese was too scary. He thought that even if the one who is closest to enlightenment in the Japanese audience circle meets the Chinese next to him, even if he has an advantage in realm, he will not be able to have a real friendship with him. There may not be an absolute chance of winning from the start. "Tell me, what is your purpose of protecting that village?" Sudbai asked. "I have already told you the reason," Saburo Uchimura replied. "Oh, then you can go die." Sudbai suddenly stretched out his hand and pressed, and the huge pressure poured down. Memory's already broken body couldn't bear it at this time. The cigarette butt spit out from his mouth, and his body was even more pressed by the pressure on Sudbai's palm. It clung to the rock wall, like a gecko, a embarrassed gecko. "I have given up resistance. If you kill me, you will be punished by the broadcast. You have no reason to kill me at this time." "Today is September 18th," Sudbai said calmly. "Saburo Uchimura. Do you know that person?" At the entrance of Sunjia village, Luhi stood in front of the old village chief sitting on the stone pier, facing the old village chief's question. "He is my college classmate and roommate." The old village chief nodded slowly, as if he remembered, and said, "Is he the one who shot you?" "Yes, that's him," Luhi replied, and at the same time he asked, "But I didn't know he was so scary." "Is this because—" The old village chief interrupted Luhi's question. He waved his hand and said, "If you shouldn't know, don't ask." Another old man from the village came over at this time, nodded to the old village chief, indicating that the arrangements were made, and then pointed at Luhi. "Zaihiza, you have been alive for several years, you should be good enough." The old village chief sighed, stood up, reached out and patted Lu, son, and his shoulders. He did not dare to use too much force. This is not an exaggerated rhetorical device, because Luhi's current body is made of paper. Luhi's company showed a look of horror. He couldn't understand. "Old village chief, other people in the village can live for at least 30 years, but I go to the ancestral hall, they are already waiting." There was no doubt in the old village chief's tone. Luhi still wanted to struggle because he could hear another meaning in the old village chief's words, but the old village chief directly wrapped a red thread around his wrist. As soon as he pulled the red thread, he had to follow in that direction. Walk. For a long time, when government orders were not sent to the countryside, ancestral halls maintained the lowest level of the ruling order and the unity of the clan's children. However, in this era, some of the ancestral halls that still remain are yes, but it is much less than before, and the appeal generated around it has also been much weaker. This can be regarded as a direct result of the lack of appeal and unity among the ethnic groups that make up the majority of the country's population. Significantly weakened. When the old village chief led Luhi to the entrance of the ancestral hall, Luhi saw a group of villagers standing outside and crying inside. And standing inside the ancestral hall were people like him, leaning on the paper man's body, people who survive. The population of Sunjia village is only more than 100, but nearly 50 people should have died long ago, but they have been living relying on the secret method in the village. Now, they are gathered in the ancestral hall, and Luhi is also pushed out, went in and stood among the group of people. Several skilled old people in the village also consciously walked into the ancestral hall at this time. In fact, they were not dead, they were still alive. The old village chief also walked in. He stood on the steps, first looked at the group of villagers in front of him who were relying on the paper figures to continue to live, and said apologetically, "Fellow folks, you should have passed away a long time ago, but you have lived so much longer and spent so much more time with your family. In any case, you are better off than those who died normally, right?" The old village chief paused and continued, "But there is nothing we can do. The village has suffered a catastrophe. Perhaps it is against the laws of heaven to prevent the dead from reincarnation. In the past, heaven did not care about us, so we could do it secretly, but this time, the village but he suffered a great disaster because of this. You all have to die, and several old guys who can inherit the magic, including me, will also die with you. Only in this way can the other people who are still alive in the village have a chance of survival. Therefore, you should also be open-minded and think of it as leaving some possibility of survival for your relatives who are still alive." After saying that, the old village chief and the elders in the village got kerosene and started pouring it in the ancestral hall. The smell of kerosene was very unpleasant, but the ending hinted in it was even more unsettling. The villagers standing outside the ancestral hall cried even harder. Some of the paper people in the ancestral hall accepted their fate, while others were still yelling and struggling, but they were already wrapped with red threads and couldn't break free at all. Even if you become a paper man and can only continue to live, for most people, it is better than being completely dead. But only the old village chief could roughly guess what kind of terrifying existence his village had provoked this time. Therefore, he did not have any luck and even gave up the intention of resisting. He could only rely on keeping his attitude as low as possible. In order to eliminate the other party's anger, the other party will let go of the villagers who have not yet reached the end of their lifespan, and at least preserve some incense for Sunjia village. As for the things that have been passed down by our ancestors, it's time to take them with us into the fire. However, just as the old village chief took out his lighter and prepared to light a fire, a gust of wind blew out the flame of the lighter. The old village chief lit the fire again, but the wind blew again and extinguished the flames. The old village chief looked around blankly, but at this moment, all the tablets in the ancestral hall began to tremble, even the top tablet that had been locked in the iron box and had never been shown to anyone began to tremble. As he became restless, the iron box actually felt like it was about to collapse. Has the great calamity arrived? An extremely old and weak voice sounded at this moment, as if thousands of years had passed. The old village chief immediately burst into tears. Everyone in the village knew that this was the appearance of the ancestor. At that moment, everyone knelt down and shouted, "The ancestor has appeared, please save me." Louhi also knelt and cried, "He didn't want to die, he really didn't want to die." Now, the ancestors actually appeared, and the hope of living immediately rose in the villagers' hearts. It was a fulfillment of faith. "Oh, then let's all die." The villagers inside and outside the ancestral hall were stunned for a moment when they heard this. It's not right. Why did the ancestor say this when he appeared? Bang bang bang. A series of explosion sounds were heard, and the bodies of the villagers who were still alive outside the ancestral hall exploded directly at this time, and the blood mist directly blended into the top iron box. The old village chief's eyes were about to burst, and he could not believe that the ancestral tablets that have been enshrined for who knows how many generations would actually do something like this when the village encounters a disaster. He was still thinking about making a last-ditch effort for the continuation of the village, but after his ancestor appeared, he immediately killed him, and he was a killer of an extinct family. The villagers outside were all living people, and they were living people who could reproduce and continue the clan. How can this be? How is this possible? The next moment, including the old village chief, the bodies of the paper people in the ancestral hall also exploded. The paper people had no flesh and blood, but their dead souls resting on the paper people were equivalent to half-ghost cultivators. At this time, their dead souls were also regarded as like nourishment. He was forcefully dragged into the iron box. The whole village, At this moment, it completely turned into deathly silence. Only the iron box on top of the altar table in the ancestral hall floats slowly. It is circling, searching, and waiting at the same time. A brief sigh came from the iron box. It must be moving again. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 961. Inherited from the bloodline. Subai thought about it for a while, but still felt that it was a bit too magical. However, this answer also explained from another angle why Saburo Uchimura could not directly take what he wanted. Although he had just beaten him to the point of losing his temper, he still couldn't. After all, he is also a senior listener. It is not a big deal to steal something from non-listeners if he violates the rules. Moreover, those non-listeners should be considered heretics on the radio, even if they kill them all and rob them all. I won't blame you for anything, but it will also increase my goodwill with the broadcaster. But since it is inherited in the blood, it is difficult to do it, because there are no physical records on the tablets, and there are no pictures of insights, etc. Those who know these techniques actually don't understand how they know it. This is in the true sense of being born knowing. Therefore, it is impossible for them to write down some secret books and records for this, and to pass down the things passed down in the blood through physical forms. Uchimura Saburo also said that his ancestor accompanied Jianzhen on his eastward journey to Japan, and he used these techniques to create a huge reputation in Japan. However, according to family history records, there was no one in the family after that ancestor. The ability of the ancestors who learned the method can only be continued by learning and integrating the methods of the local Japanese onmyoji. It is tantamount to assimilation, and it is completely assimilated, because the ancestors' housekeeping skills were originally with the death of the ancestors, the inheritance was completely lost. This kind of blood inheritance is quite common in mythical beasts, but it seems that it is really not heard of in humans. Subai remembered that Lord Buddha had a conversation with the monk while drinking tea. It probably meant that those mythical beasts generally suffered from infertility due to difficulty in reproducing. It was too difficult to give birth to an offspring, and because the population of the group was too small, males, the probability of a female meeting each other is very small, and the probability of sparking love is also very small. This is not a joke. After all, at the level of a mythical beast, it can only be smarter than normal people, but not stupid. If they are picky and force themselves not to be together, they will still be together. It is very possible. In short, this has caused the number of mythical beasts to go from bad to worse and never to increase. If scale cannot be formed, climate cannot be formed. Later, the mythical beasts simply added something to their bloodline for this purpose, so that as long as the descendants survive and become adults, they can naturally awaken the secrets of the group. It is also simple and convenient, and increases the survival of the descendants. Rate. As for human beings, there is no need for this at all. First, the starting point of human beings is too low at the beginning, but the number of human beings is huge. They climbed up step by relying on their own cultural and political systems, and finally became the true masters of this world. This proves the saying that population can become the primary productive force in many cases. It's absolutely true. I also tried to pass over one of them, but I couldn't get the inheritance from that person. I originally planned to set up a research base in Japan to conduct genetic research on those people, but the plan was destroyed because of the listeners of the broadcast. So many layouts and things must be done in advance, which makes it seem very rushed, explained Saburo Uchimura. Subai nodded. He didn't think Saburo Uchimura was lying, because the audience was a very realistic existence, especially at their level. Everything was driven by interests. The other party had been beaten down by him, and he planned to destroy that village. If he was smart, he should tell the secret of that village. Maybe he could change his mind. When the time came, he would eat meat without taking a sip of soup. But that kind of thing with paper figures is still attractive to you. Subai was curious about this, a mysterious village, but in the final analysis, their ability is nothing more than to poke out paper figures as puppet tools or rely on paper figures to survive. Saburo Uchimura is an advanced listener after all. Really, do you like those things? Saburo Uchimura hesitated for a moment, smiled bitterly, and said. The ancestor had a notebook that recorded in detail some things about his bloodline magic, or some insights. This notebook has been kept and passed down by the family. The purpose is to hope that future generations can rely on it to understand something. Maybe you can have the opportunity to inherit some of the abilities of your ancestors and carry forward the family. It was only after I became a senior that I read through my ancestors' notebook again. I had read it before, but I didn't really take it seriously at that time. But after reading it that time, I suddenly realized my ancestors' techniques and insights. My understanding and control of Shikigami are much better than mine at that time. Even now, I cannot reach the level of understanding that my ancestors had at that time. Therefore, what the ancestors passed down at that time was definitely not the villagers' little metaphysical skills, but the real art of generosity. The reason why the ancestors and the people in the village who were similar to the ancestors from generation to generation failed to understand and thoroughly understand this inheritance and record it was because, firstly, their bodies were ordinary people's bodies, and their starting point was too low. Secondly, because that inheritance is too high-end, it is impossible for non-advanced listeners and above to really understand it. Saburo Uchimura became more and more excited as he talked, and a blush appeared on his face that was originally a little pale due to the serious injury. Subai knew clearly that this guy combined his longing for the realm of strength with the longing for the entire family, so he was so obsessed with that thing. As for Subai himself, to be honest, he didn't really feel much about it. Regardless of whether the village was destroyed or not, he wanted to see it anyway. His old classmate could also sit down and have a chat. Just like that, Uchimura's Saburo turned into a layer of faint black mist floating in front, and Subai followed behind. Soon, the place was arrived. It was really hard to find. It was located in the mountain kernel. The space is indeed quite remote. However, the village is now shrouded in a cloud of white smoke. If ordinary people saw it, they might think that there was a water and land dojo inside, but Subai could see it right away. Those white smoke were not that simple. Ordinary creatures would probably enter it. Only flesh and blood were sacrificed and souls were deprived of their share. Such an exaggerated battle, Subai asked. If this village had been so grand, could the radio be able to tolerate it until now? Something happened, something must have happened in the village, Saburo Uchimura said with some confusion. Some changes must have happened in the village. Saying that, Saburo Uchimura rushed over directly. It was not that he wanted to take the opportunity to escape from Subai's control. In fact, Subai was too lazy to kill him. In today's environment, the death rate in the story world has increased to the limit. If he does any more violations, if the broadcasting rules cause the difficulty of the next story world to be raised again, or there will be another trial story world, then Subai will really not survive the day when Gendeo rescues the little guy. And this Taejun has always been very cooperative, provided you defeat him. Saburo Uchimura rushed directly into the white smoke. Subai slowly walked that way. When Subai was about to reach the entrance of the village, that is, when he was about to enter the range of white smoke, a roar suddenly came from inside, like a large truck crashed directly into someone's house. Subai stepped in, and the white smoke around him seemed to want to get closer to him at first, but maybe he was frightened by the aura on his body and slowly moved away. Wherever Subai went, the white smoke dispersed. Look, it sounds very interesting. In fact, it is easy to find where to go, because although the village is shrouded in a large white smoke, there is a place that is always blooming with a dark red light, which is like a guiding light. As if, Subai also came closer. Hiss. A sound like an electric current came from the oldest and most primitive building in front. This was the place where the red light came from. It should be an ancestral hall, because the plaque on the door said Sun Family Ancestral Hall, but Subai, however, he saw Saburo Uchimura, who came in first, being fixed at the door of the ancestral hall by a nail, and the bloody light from his body was drawn out from time to time and flew into the ancestral hall. "Help me!" When Saburo Uchimura saw Subai coming over, he couldn't help but ask for help. This scene really surprised Subai. Although Uchimura was seriously injured by him, he couldn't be bullied by just any cat or dog. Subai looked at the nail on Saburo Uchimura's body. It was a nail specially used to suppress zombies or evil spirits. In fact, at first, the pre-Qin practitioners used this to suppress some ancient ferocious beasts. But later, as the ancient ferocious beasts became more and more rare, they resorted to using them to suppress zombies and other evil spirits. This is called the soul-suppressing nail. Fatty can find this thing somewhere, but Fatty's one is a replica, and he doesn't bother to bring it with him at ordinary times. It's better to draw the talisman in the air by himself. It's just that the nail embedded in Saburo Uchimura's body has an aura that makes Subai a little afraid. This nail should be a genuine soul-suppressing nail refined by a pre-Qin practitioner. "What's inside?" Subai asked, but he was not in a hurry to save the prince. "Have no idea." Saburo Uchimura endured the pain and signaled Subai to save him quickly. He didn't believe that Subai couldn't see that his blood was being continuously drawn out and then absorbed by the unknown existence inside. Subai took a step back with a smile on his lips. Uchimura was anxious, and he said in disbelief, You want to leave?" Subai pointed downwards and said, "It's already like this, why not leave?" When the white smoke receded, there were pieces of corpses lying on the ground under Subai's feet, and each one was rotten beyond recognition. The entire village had been slaughtered first. The most important thing is that Subai saw a seal character that he didn't recognize engraved on the nail that was driven into Uchimura's body. After experiencing the Lashan giant Buddha incident, Subai really became a little insensitive to anything that might be related to that dynasty. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 962. P.S. You can post more chapter comments and comments on each paragraph. These things will be read every time. It will also make everyone feel more interactive when reading the book, which is quite interesting. Click on the screen and the upper right corner there is a prompt to choose whether to turn on chapter barrage. Subai planned to retreat. He didn't care about the final danger of Taejun being nailed there. It was none of his business anyway. To be honest, even if the other party was not a Japanese audience but a Chinese audience, if there was nothing special about it, if that were the case, even if it were someone else who was here instead of Subai, he would probably choose to ignore the matter and ignore it. It is basically non-existent for the audience to yell at each other when there is injustice. However, when Subai walked to the entrance of the village, the white smoke around him suddenly began to thicken, as if a person suddenly took a breath, and the atmosphere began to slowly freeze. Subai turned around and looked behind him. He knew clearly that the man in the village didn't want to leave by himself. Buzz. Suddenly, a nail that was exactly the same as the nail that had just been driven into Taejun's body shot out from the white smoke. Subai's pupils narrowed slightly. With Taejun's lessons learned, Subai certainly couldn't take it lightly, and besides, his own body was not able to take it lightly. The zombies were restrained by the soul-suppressing nail. Subai took a step forward. Instead of using his hands to directly block the nail, he instead opened up an aura in front of him. Boom! The soul-suppressing nail hit the aura in front of Subai, making a harsh friction sound. Although Subai's aura was being continuously compressed, the speed of the soul-suppressing nail was also constantly weakening. Subai took this opportunity to reach out with one hand, directly grasped the soul-suppressing nail and buckled it to the ground. Hiss, hiss. The soul-suppressing nail looked like a soldering iron to Subai, and it was reacting crazily with the zombie evil energy in his body. This mutually reinforcing reaction was indeed violent, but Subai let out a low roar from his throat, and with all the strength of his body he hit it hard with all his might. Boom! At this moment, the whole village was trembling, and several houses even collapsed. This was enough to show how terrifying Subai's strength was this time. And the soul-suppressing nail that was still struggling and trying to bite back was completely silent at this time. Subai bombarded it with absolute physical strength, which was equivalent to forcibly destroying the inside of the soul-suppressing nail in the most brutal way. All its structures have been erased of all its qualities. Call. With a long breath, Subai picked up the nails again and looked at the red direction in the white mist in front of him, which is the location of the ancestral hall. Not causing trouble does not mean that Subai is afraid of trouble, especially since the other party attacked him first. Then it would be a bit unethical for me to go back without returning the gift. Saburo Uchimura was still struggling, but his body and soul were suppressed by the soul-suppressing nail. He was attacked in a hurry, and he had just been severely injured by Subai before. Now, it is difficult to he had no strength to resist anymore, especially after Subai left directly, he seemed a little desperate. However, he actually made a more terrifying discovery, because he noticed that the existence that was absorbing his life force. And myself. Same source. This is a very cold and cruel discovery, but the remains of severed limbs that can be seen everywhere in the village are extremely strong evidence. That is his ancestor, who is recovering by devouring descendants who are blood related to him. Worshipping ancestors is a common denominator in most national cultures. Everyone thinks that the spirits of ancestors in heaven will protect you. But when you find that you have become the food of your ancestors, the blow is really huge, because your life is inherited from your ancestors, and at least half of the meaning of your existence is due to the blessings of your ancestors. Saburo Uchimura was a little surprised when Subai came again. When he saw the soul-suppressing nail in Subai's hand, he was even more surprised. But he soon became calm. Also, this guy with a body that is so strong that he is at a perverted level. A soul-suppressing nail really can't deal with him. Without too much nonsense, Subai reached out and grabbed the soul-suppressing nail nailed to Taejun's body, and then pulled it out. Then Subai held the nail in his hand and smashed it to the ground again. Boom. This time it was too close to the surrounding buildings. Except for this ancestral hall, all the nearby houses collapsed and turned into piles of rubble. The two destroyed nails were thrown on the ground by Subai casually. Since he decided to meet the provocative person in the ancestral hall, Subai would not allow him to continue to draw vitality from the devil to strengthen himself. Saburo Uchimura covered his chest and stood up tremblingly. He smiled and said nothing. He just lowered his head and followed Subai into the ancestral hall. It's not that Uchimura didn't shed tears when he saw the coffin, or that he was still greedy for something, but because at this stage, he really couldn't escape easily, because the secrets here and the existence were related to his ancestors. Furthermore, the audience is a type of people who live with their heads tied to their waists. They are afraid of death, but they are not afraid of trying to commit suicide. There were broken paper figures everywhere in the ancestral hall, and on the 7 or 8-story tablet steps, all the rest of the tablets had fallen down, and only the top iron box was still standing there. Subai could clearly feel that there was an eye in the iron box, staring at his entrance. Opening his palms, Subai stretched out his hand towards the iron box, and a force was immediately released to clamp the iron box, causing it to escape from the steps and fly directly to Subai's hand. The other party didn't seem to make any struggle, and was just restrained by Subai. But halfway, the iron box suddenly opened on its own, and a scroll flew out of it and spread out directly. As soon as the scroll was spread out, Subai felt a sense of déjà vu. He remembered that Jixiang had an identical scroll before. The memories filled in the incubator when he was a child also came from this scroll, but that scroll was replaced by Lichi asked Jaime to take the little guy away that night and then disappeared. If nothing else happened, it should have ended up in Lichi's hands. But what is going on with this picture in front of me? Record book. What surprised Subai was that he was familiar with this painting but didn't know why, but the Japanese around him actually called out the name of the painting. When the Japanese said the words recording books, Subai instantly thought of a person, Lu Sheng. In fact, after confirming that broadcasting had a great relationship with the Qin dynasty more than 2,000 years ago, Subai had specifically read historical information about the Qin dynasty and the previous Macedonian Empire, so he was no stranger to Lushu. However, this picture had been lost long ago, and its exact information could not be found online. According to legend, Lushu was presented to the first emperor by the alchemist Lu Sheng after he returned from the sea. It records that the Qin dynasty fell to Hu. Therefore, the first emperor sent Meng Tian to lead 300,000 troops to attack the Xiongnu in the north. Later, he built more for insurance. The Great Wall. This picture is very similar to the Tuabei picture that appeared in the Tang dynasty in later generations, both of which have the ability to predict the future. But which one is real, the one from my childhood or the one in front of me? Could it be that the painting of my childhood was copied by Su Yuhang himself? There is a record in the ancestor's notes that he often dreams about this picture at night. According to the research of the ancestor, this should be the Lu Shu. The ancestor drew its shape in the note. It is unmistakable. This is the Lu Shu. Taejun was very happy. It is determined. Ah! A sigh came from the ancestral hall, with a laziness as if just waking up. How familiar, this breath, comes from darkness, minions. The painting began to curl up slowly, looking a little wrinkled, but among the wrinkles, an old face was revealed. His eyes were very indifferently scanning Subai and Uchimura's Saburo below, focusing on Saburo. Uchimura stayed for a while. I didn't expect that, my descendants, would also become, part of the darkness. Your ancestor Subai said to the Taejun beside him. Uchimura Saburo was very vigilant at this time. After all, his ancestor had just planned to devour him. As for the second meaning of Subai's words, Taejun was not able to understand it yet. The face in the painting did not continue to say anything, but spread out again, and then, a painting finally appeared in the blank scroll. In the painting, it is a vast barren mountain, but there are the corpses of many strange beasts below. These strange beasts were huge, and they should have been burning fiercely when they were alive, but they have all fallen at this time. There are also human corpses inside, each of which was nailed to death. On the cliff, both in terms of clothing and style, it is very different from the primitive tribes in ancient times that Subai remembered, because the people there have third eyes and their bodies are larger than those on the earth. People are about twice as big. At the same time, Subai noticed that in the corner of the screen, there were a bunch of deflated balloons, like big soft buns. Subai had seen these things before. When the train came back for the first time, Subai entered. I encountered this kind of buns in the train. These buns have extremely powerful devouring and corrosive abilities. They killed a large number of senior people at the train station. What is this painting about? Subai had a vague guess in his mind, but he couldn't be sure. Until then, the scroll seemed to be unfolding continuously, and the picture and content displayed in the painting were also constantly extending and expanding. In a position in the lower right corner, there appeared a hilltop, with a group of people standing on the top of the hill. The clothes of this group of people are very normal, basically modern clothes. Some of these people are smoking, some are drinking, some are sitting and basking in the sun, some are arguing, some are looking out, and some are taking a nap. Sun, every character is vividly portrayed, a bit like a river during the Qingming festival, but one thing is obvious. This group of people have just experienced a battle, but they won. There are a lot of beasts and strangers' corpses in the mountains in front of them. Is the result of their victory. Sudbai saw the woman standing at the front of the crowd, and his breathing suddenly stagnated. Although it is difficult to completely depict the specific facial details of the character in ink paintings, and this area only occupies a small corner in the entire painting, but Sudbai still felt that the temperament of the woman in the painting was very similar to that of a woman he knew. This is a picture of that world? What is that? Taejun pointed to the lower left corner of the painting. Sudbai looked over and saw that it was a bare mountain, but the inside of the mountain seemed to have been dripped with some ink from a brush, making it look like there was something inside the mountain. There are many black squares hidden. Obviously, the group of people enjoying the afterglow of victory in the distance did not notice this. Black squares. Black blocks. Sudbai raised his head suddenly. This is the coffin. Densely hidden inside the mountain. There were hundreds of coffins. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 963. When he learned that Sudbai had gone to Longhu Mountain in Jiangxi province after taking revenge, the fat man was so angry that he cursed. The reason was that Sudbai did not come back from outside, the monk went to Xi'an again, and even the Buddha actually became the shopkeeper said that he was going to visit an old friend. The whole construction team was managed by his fat man alone. This made the fat man feel very unbalanced. This is the place where 4 people will live together in the future. Why should he start all over again by himself? To the end? But if he feels unbalanced in his heart, he still has to keep going. Fortunately, Fatty also has a bold personality. Whether it is pretending or natural, he is very suitable to hang out with all kinds of people. During the day, I directed the workers not to slack off during the construction, and at night, we all organized a golden flower explosion together, and talked about pornographically. It was a happy and comfortable life. If it weren't for the lack of places in this ravine, maybe the fat man would really bring others with him. Go take a dirty bath. And in another county seat in Sichuan, the figure of the Buddha appeared. There are many famous temples in Sichuan. The Buddha has come here frequently before. This time it is like revisiting the old place. The mentality now is really different from before, so the emotions he felt when revisiting his old place were also different. According to the current general premise, everyone is actually running out of time. During this time, instead of going into retreat and practicing in the hope of greater breakthroughs, instead of wandering around and traveling around, it is indeed a very luxurious thing, but Buddha is not care a lot about this. The last place he chose to go was the Shifang Luhan temple in front of him. The temple director was also an old acquaintance of his. He was a very elegant monk with a monastic name, Sichuan. In the past, Master Sichuan traveled in Sichuan and Tibet, and also visited the temple where the Buddha lived. The Buddha usually did not see visitors, because although his name and inheritance were not found in public reports and records, the people of his lineage the inheritance also has great influence in Tibetan areas. But that day, Buddha made an exception and met with this monk Sichuan. Well, Sichuan had not yet become the host at that time. Buddha remembered that he had just tempered his body that day and walked into the living room shirtless. Monk Sichuan was frightened and at a loss when he saw the scars on his body. At that time, Buddha was just joking, but when he saw that the other party was being so frightened made me find it very interesting. Later, when he sat and discussed Buddhism, Buddha discovered that the other person was not actually very accomplished in Buddhism, but his understanding of some Buddhist scriptures was unique to him. At that time, the Buddha felt that this monk Sichuan was not good at practicing Buddhism, but he was closer to the Buddha than most monks. The last time we met was more than 10 years ago. Now the Buddha has come to visit in person and found that although the temple occupies a small area, it is exquisite and elegant. It does not look dilapidated at all, but gives people a sense of excitement. Xiangrong's perception. Ordinary people look at the weather when they visit a Buddhist temple. It is a simple truth. If the monks in the temple are all fat and rich, it means that the temple has aura. If the temple is shabby, the monks are also skinny. Even the monks who serve themselves, why should other people worship in a temple where the monks can't protect them? The real knowledgeable people look at the fortune, which is different from Mr. Yin and Yang helping people look at the yin and yang houses. In the eyes of real monks, the temple is not actually a tourist attraction, but a dharma field. A strong dharma field means that if the temple has a prosperous fortune, but a weak dharma field means that its fortune will decline. No matter how magnificently decorated the temple is, it is just gold and jade on the outside. Buddha walked directly into the temple. Shifang Luhan Temple has become more and more famous in recent years, and more tourists and believers have come to visit. Buddha walked through them and deliberately did not let them see him. Those who come to revisit their old places do not just take photos and pray for blessings like other tourists. To put it bluntly, for Buddha and Kilo, the so-called Buddha's heart remains is no longer a joke. After all, their greater faith in the Buddha of heaven and earth has actually long since they became listeners and experienced the power of radio. It's broken. It's not like broadcasts have never set up any real Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the story world before. Therefore, Buddha and monk Kilo now only practice Buddhism and will not really blindly worship those gods and Buddhas. The backyard of the temple is not open to tourists and seems much quieter. After Buddha walked in, he happened to see a middle-aged monk wearing cassocks and glasses sitting under the pavilion reading a book, completely relaxed. It's just that what the other person is reading is not a Buddhist scripture or a period book, but a Chinese version of A Dream of Red Mansions. Buddha revealed his figure and walked over. Only then did the other party feel that someone was coming. He put down the book and pushed up his glasses. When he saw the appearance of the person, he was startled because he really didn't know what he was doing. Know why the other party appears here. The name of the human shadow tree, Buddha's status in Buddhism is highly respected, and he also has a strong influence in the secular world, so he showed up directly in the hall without saying hello, which really shocked the host Siquan. But the host Siquan only stabilized his mind a little, put his hands together and took a few steps forward to greet him. Amitabha. Buddha didn't show politeness to the other party, and directly found a place in the pavilion to sit down. Host Siquan just sighed in his heart. He hadn't seen him for more than 10 years, but his temperament hadn't changed at all. At that moment, host Siquan took out his mobile phone and made a call. The main message was to ask his novice monks to prepare some food and drink. After finishing the instructions and putting down the phone, host Siquan noticed that Buddha sitting there suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at, master?" Siquan asked. "Using a mobile phone to call my subordinates to prepare for food really ruins the atmosphere." Hearing this reason, the host Siquan also laughed, sat down opposite the Buddha, and said, "We are all advancing with the times, and this is the case now. We still have wireless network in the temple." Buddha shook his head, not because he lamented that the other party made the temple too tacky, because he knew the other party's character. "Reading?" Buddha asked. "Well, I'll read for a while. I've been too busy recently, so I just hid myself. If you hadn't been here, master, I wouldn't have even planned to turn on my phone." Host Siquan also spoke sincerely. "Master, are you wandering in the clouds?" "Well, let's be honest, I came here to see you. I heard about you and you did a good job." After a while, another friend of mine came back. I introduced him here. His Buddha Li comes from the same lineage as you. He is the first person in the world to talk about Buddhism and preach the sutras. I am ashamed of myself. The Buddha is naturally talking about monk Kilo. In fact, it stands to reason that monk Kilu is more suitable for this profession. Then our temple will naturally be prepared to welcome you. Host Sukwon stood up and bowed to the Buddha. For a temple, having a great monk come to give a lecture is like a nightclub inviting the four heavenly kings to sing. The meaning and impact are naturally different. It's his own business. Let's not talk about it for now. I want to lend you something here. Something? Host Sukwon asked, a little puzzled. There is a ray of Buddha's light on the top of your temple. I need it. This. Host Sukwon was a little dazed. He really didn't know what Lord Fo's words meant. During the Wenchuan earthquake in 2008, a maternal and child hospital asked you for help, and you took in more than 100 pregnant women, Foy reminded. Oh, this is about it, Host Sukwon finally understood. In the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake, the affected area was actually very large. Due to the impact of the earthquake, many places were paralyzed and unable to operate. As a last resort, a local maternal and child hospital came to ask Shifang Luhan Temple to take in a group of pregnant women. At that time, Sukwon was already pregnant. Hosted, he didn't hesitate and agreed directly. At the time of the earthquake, everyone's life was actually a bit tight, and supplies were not very abundant at the beginning. Moreover, Luhan Temple had already taken in many nearby victims, but Director Sukwon accepted these pregnant women without any hesitation. Settle down. The birth of a child is actually a kind of bloody disaster, which is very unlucky for Buddhism, especially in a temple, which has an unknown meaning. However, the host Sukwon didn't care. He stipulated that other victims were not allowed to eat in the temple. Meat, but preparing meat for pregnant women because they need nutrition, even this commandment is broken. During the most difficult period, the monks in the temple had nothing to eat. Every day they would wait for the pregnant women to finish eating before eating their leftovers. If not, they would go hungry and wait until the disaster relief operations were under normal operation. The situation improved after supplies came in. It is said that during that time, 108 babies were born in this temple, known as the 108 Arhat babies. In previous years, when these babies were 5 years old, many parents would come to the temple to offer incense. Thank you, many children were named by their parents at the request of Sukwon. No one scolded you at that time, Buddha asked, blasphemed the Buddha's spirit. The situation was urgent at that time, so we had to take care of the living people first and ignore the statues, host Sukwon replied with a smile. Buddha stretched out his hand and patted Master Sukwon on the shoulder. Logically speaking, this kind of behavior would not happen to the two eminent monks, but Buddha was too lazy to care so much. He immediately waved his palm, and the sight lingering on the temple was invisible to the naked eye. The Buddha's light was taken off by him. Because of the personal consent of Sukwon, the Buddha's light that was originally unbound to protect the temple was allowed to be taken away by the Buddha without any struggle, although Sukwon could not see it. I won't let you suffer. This piece of Buddha's light is the result of great merit. It should be able to protect your temple and keep it prosperous for 30 years. Buddha stretched out his palm, and a huge rockery stone flew over automatically in the distance, which startled the host Sukwon. Where had he seen such a battle before? Buddha scratched his fingertips and used his own blood to carve sutras in Sanskrit on the big stone. After finishing writing, Buddha slapped the big stone, and the big stone turned upside down and the lower end was directly embedded in the ground. This. Host Sukwon was still somewhat calm, but what he saw today was really too shocking. This stone tablet can protect your temple from evil spirits for hundreds of years. After finishing speaking, Buddha's figure disappeared directly on the spot. Host Sukwon sat in the pavilion and waited until the novice monk who delivered the fruit plate came over before he woke up. Many monks and novice monks in the temple had discovered the sudden appearance of the stone tablet. They were all shocked by the miracle and began to chant sutras and worship. Master, what's going on? The little novice monk was also shocked. What's going on? Send me to the clinic, I want to take my blood pressure. On a provincial road outside the temple, a lama wearing cassocks was walking, and vehicles drove past him from time to time. Buddha raised his palm from time to time to look at this ray of Buddha's light of merit, thinking that he had a way to break through to the beginning of the advanced audience, but then his mind changed. I just don't know what the effect will be after Kilu has held it in for so long. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 964. When the picture of recording books was fully revealed, Sudbai's heart felt like a turbulent wave. And what follows is ecstasy? Yes. Ecstasy. Taking a long breath, Sudbai felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. Although he and Fatty had been working hard to improve their realm and hoped to attain enlightenment as soon as possible, no one knew whether there would be another batch of trains. It was very likely that maybe after you worked hard and succeeded in attaining enlightenment, what you are waiting for is still the ending of being destroyed. Never underestimate the power of radio to destroy listeners. Even if you are a big boss, are these big bosses really willing to get on a train and go to another world to be cannon fodder? The Blood Corpse finally managed to smuggle back, but was it discovered by the broadcast that he was pulled into the story world, or was he suppressed to death? Why is Boss Liang, who is already a big boss, still like this? Well, this is an exception, so I won't mention it anymore. In short, broadcasting has the ability to kill the enlightened person. It is nothing more than raising the difficulty of a story world to a high value. For example, setting up a few demons in this story world, or even creating an extremity area, the boss can enter it. There is no life in death. Even if you are lucky enough to survive once, the radio can still pull you in and ravage you over and over again. No matter how lucky you are, you cannot withstand such torment. But the picture in this picture tells Sudbai an absolutely important piece of information, that is, the first emperor did not know what method he used, and actually asked Su Fu to take nearly 500 coffins to the next place in the world that he wanted to conquer in advance. In the past, Sudbai had always wondered what the purpose of the first emperor was to sacrifice tens of thousands of elite tiger warriors to create 500 evil stars. Now, the answer is revealed. The first emperor was betting that the first emperor of China 2000 years ago knew that he could not win at that time. It was a losing war because radio could continuously transport big men from another world to join the war. As for boss-level combat power, except for broadcasting, there is simply no way to produce it cyclically. Even the Qin army, which could easily form a 100,000-strong army of high-level listeners at that time, could not withstand batch after batch of troops in that era. Batch the consumption of audience bosses one after another. Broadcast's cultivation method of cultivating goo is a bit like an artificial ecosystem. It can be continuously replenished and adjusted as needed to keep the output at a constant value. It can only be higher but not lower. However, after the Qin dynasty started the war, his army will be seriously damaged. If one or two of the 50 Qin soldiers at that time, whose strength is equivalent to that of a high-level audience, have hope of becoming enlightened within 10 years, after the war begins, the number of Qin soldiers of all levels of strength will definitely continue. The land has been reduced sharply, and the bottom, middle, and top levels have gradually lost their previous hematopoietic ability due to constant consumption. This is an unfair and uneven war. What the broadcast consumes is nothing more than the batches of experiencers who invest in it. The experiencers, that is, ordinary people, this raw material is really simple. Therefore, the first emperor chose this method, leaving the real decisive battle 2000 years later, when the broadcast was about to move, when the broadcast had begun to implement the audience destruction plan, and when the broadcast itself, when production capacity has been gradually shut down and suspended. At this moment, Sudbai felt that his understanding of the first emperor became clearer. So, it is conceivable that the previous armored men, the eldest son Fusu, and the person in front of him whose identity is probably Lu Sheng, they have gone through all the troubles to hide until now and then jumped out one after another. Its purpose. It should be a report, right? Report to the 500 evil stars hidden in another world and wake them up from their slumber. Sudbai's breathing became more serious at this time. He knew that once the evil stars buried deep under the mountain of that world were awakened, as long as they could come out of the coffin, then the people like Lizzie would be seen on the radio. The last batch of combat forces to deal with the remaining threats in that world will be annihilated in an instant. Sudbai has personally experienced how scary the armored man is. To compare, Sudbai was able to fight Chen Ryu repeatedly. Although he was suppressed severely, Chen Ryu didn't really do anything serious, but Sudbai faced the armored man was completely crushed, no, even almost killed. If it weren't for Lao Fugui's backhand, he would have completely fallen. Chen Ryu's fighting ability is comparable to that of the audience who just preached the Dao. She was able to compete with Luda, the Dao leader, but the armored man also carried a seal. After he was completely unblocked, Sudbai thought that even if Boss Liang took action himself, it would be difficult to say who would lose and who would win. In fact, Boss Liang might not be able to defeat him. And there were 499 coffins hidden there. Li Ji's group only numbered about 50. In addition, the Qin soldiers were good at fighting in battle formations. As long as those people wake up. As long as they can wake up. It is estimated that not many of Lizzie's gang will survive. As long as a group of those people die, the broadcaster will definitely have to postpone the audience destruction plan, but will try its best to let its own group of people to prove the truth, and then fight again. The purpose of the first emperor's arrangement could not be to vent his anger. If it was to vent his anger, at worst, he died in a vigorous battle 2,000 years ago, so why bother making it so complicated? Does this mean that the first emperor calculated that once the broadcast is ready to be moved, it will be in an irreversible state and cannot be changed? And the broadcast has indeed stopped the process of continuing to receive experiencers? This is equivalent to castrating the broadcast's ability to create enlightened persons. The original unequal state of everyone has been changed to a balance. The broadcast can only rely on the existing a group of listeners are to be trained and sent to be used as cannon fodder, and they will die less and less. There is no way to replenish them. If you want to really replenish them, you have to enter that world. People who understand. The old voice sounded again, and he seemed to see through Sudbai's thoughts. Even though Sudbai had already cultivated to the state of being silent about his emotions and anger, he still couldn't hide it from this old guy. I just don't know if this old guy is Lu Sheng back then. Most Chinese people are familiar with Su Fu, because there is a joke that Little Japan is the descendant of the 500 boys and girls Su Fu brought after the founding of the country, but for not many people know about Lu Sheng. In fact, at that time, he and Su Fu had about the same status in front of the first emperor. There were two other people named Ho Sheng and Han Zhong, who were also equally famous alchemists. Even to a certain extent, Fu Su's qualifications are not as old as these people. After all, judging from the memory of the armored man, Fu Su can only be regarded as the younger generation, while Su Fu Sheng and his group are really together with the first emperor. He planned to face the backbone of the broadcast invasion. What is now known is that Su Fu sealed the 500 evil stars in a coffin. Historical records indicate that he disappeared without a trace when he sailed eastward to the sea, but he actually appeared in that world. So, the person in front of him who showed recording books, the old man, should be Lu Sheng. They each have their own division of labor for this real showdown 2,000 years later. Saburo Uchimura was a little confused. Although he was a high-level audience, he certainly didn't know as much about the events of that era as Sudbai, a half-witness. But one thing he knew clearly was that this mysterious existence should undoubtedly be his ancestor. But the ancestor suddenly said, "I understand," but his descendants really didn't understand at all. Understood? Sudbai answered simply. How to do? Yes, there is no need to bargain. Nothing is more important than his own life. Subai believes that if he were replaced by a fat man or a monk, they would be so straightforward. The evil star in those 500 coffins has awakened, and Li Ji's group is in danger. After he and others have attained enlightenment, he will also face them. But who cares? At least you can live a little longer. At least you won't be treated like garbage by the broadcast. At least you still have a chance to fight. How to choose? It really couldn't be more clear. He. What should I do? Subai asked again, helping Su to wake up, but it seemed that he did not complete the task. Subai knew clearly that the first emperor must have left a lot of back UPS in order to be able to revive the arrangement of that world, but these back UPS have been used by so many generations of listeners. Under the excavations of the leading party, Puppet Army and Second Devils, it is estimated that Lu Sheng really survived. However, he used such extreme methods and did not hesitate to sacrifice his descendants. He cultivated a bloodline inheritance, and then when he had a premonition that the broadcast was about to move, he swallowed his descendants and regained the power of the same origin. In other words, Lu Sheng dispersed his power and injected it into the blood of his descendants to avoid being scanned by the broadcast, and his descendants' incense became his sacrifice. This kind of ruthless method is really no less than the first emperor watching tens of thousands of tigers and beni under his command kill each other. Saburo Uchimura looked at Subai. What is it? What are you doing? This feeling of unequal information is really not good. Adults talk, children don't interrupt, Subai replied. Mr. Uchimura. The only thing to do is, don't do anything. Subai. This time it was Subai's turn to be speechless. Damn it, why did you, an old bastard like you, suddenly wake up? Just to take a breather and look at the scenery? Today's cause, and tomorrow's result, I know it with my heart, I have my own way. The painting slowly began to burn, and the old voice began to slowly dissipate. Subai thought about the old man's last words and finally understood something. Yes, there is no specific way to preserve them. Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao also took away the terracotta warriors and horses and the Macedonian palace before integrating into the broadcast. If there is any specific way, if it had stayed, it would have been destroyed long ago. This old man woke up once at this time at the expense of the blood of his descendants. Just to tell myself some truth arrangements. It's like planting a seed in your heart. As for what kind of fruit the seed will grow and how much influence it can exert, it all depends on God. So, this seed definitely cannot be planted just for yourself. There should be others who have also heard the news. Sneeze, sneeze, Boss Liang, who had just got off the plane, sneezed several times. It's so cold in Qinhuangdao.